I thought I'd do another ghost story video, seeing as everybody likes these, and this video isn't going to be so much ghost stories as it's just going to be weird stuff that's happened I can't really explain to me throughout my life. All kind of, you know, disconnected stories, just I thought I'd go through a load of them and people might find it interesting because they find it was interesting. So I'll start off with one that was, I can still remember it, it's really odd, I don't know if it was a ghost or just, you know, weird. Because you have all these theories like, you know, the real life's like the Matrix, or your brain, you know, glitches every now and again and invents things that aren't there. So if you're a skeptic, take it as a skeptic. If you think ghosts are real, maybe this will further your belief in ghosts, otherwise you might, you know, but regardless, the stories are what they are. So this one, I must have been like 5, I wasn't very old, and I was in a Tesco shop, and my mum said, where this shop is, there's like all the tills, and then at the end of the tills there's like rows of seats, so you can sit down in the seat if you're waiting for somebody to go through the till. So she said, obviously, you know, don't go off, go where I can see you, and sit down and sit on the chair, you know, and wait for me. So she's paying for items, you know, going through the till, and some old lady comes and shuffles up next to me and says, you know, you're a good boy, what are you doing? It's, you know, one of those sort of bored old people kind of conversations. And it got to the stage and near the end, and she said, and don't you walk off and sit where your mum can see you, and all stuff like that. And then she gets up and shuffles very slowly out the door. And where this street is, you pretty much have the option of going one or two ways, you know, so you can see out the shop where the windows are if somebody's shuffling off in one or two directions, and obviously she can work very fast. I think she had a Zimmer frame or like a walking stick as well. And then my mum, you know, comes up to me and she said, you alright? And I said, I was talking to that weird old lady. She said, you weren't talking to anybody, you were just sat on the chair. And then I, you know, looked out the window either way, and there wasn't the shuffling old lady. So, unless I'd already started going crazy from a very young age, that was a very odd one. There was a second one. This one's quite creepy, actually. I can still remember this quite clearly. Where I went to primary school, there's like an old house, and I guess it's like a groundskeeper's house or something that they had on the site of the school, and you weren't allowed, obviously, in it as a kid. You weren't actually allowed off of the playground where I went to primary school. The school site was quite big, but you weren't allowed outside of the playgrounds, if that made sense. So we had a small section of woods near the school, even though they were like fenced off from the outside, you weren't allowed in, which is a shame, because I think, you know, letting kids play in nature would probably help them with their development later in life if they, you know, can go outside and do active things. But they, you know, corralled us into quite a small playground area most of the time so they could supervise us better. But getting off topic, on the like bit outside the playground, so you could see it was like where the driveway was to the school. There used to be like an old house, and I said I think it's a groundskeeper's house, something like that. And that house was, you know, not actually used by anyone. They'd lock it up, and it was used as storage. I think they used almost every room in the house to hold boxes of stuff, resources, things like that. Because nobody lived in it and they didn't rent it out because it was on the school property, they you know, just literally used it as a storage thing. So nobody ever lived in there. You wouldn't see anybody go in. Occasionally you'd see a caretaker, you know, in a uniform going in, and they wouldn't be in very long, and they'd come out carrying a load of boxes and they'd lock up again. So one day we're on the playground and we're like, you know, stood as far close as you can to the house, but you're still on the playground, so you're maybe 10 yards away from it, 20 yards away from it. And we're looking up at it, and the curtain moves in the upstairs window, and this horrible kind of jaundicey yellowed face, you know, goes to the window very briefly, moves back, and the curtain closes. Scared the shit out of us, you know, and we're probably only like 7 or so at the time. A couple of people saw it, but you know, the door was locked, nobody had gone in and out, but some old sort of decaying figure almost appeared at the window briefly, moved the curtain, looked out, and then closed it again. I still remember that. And you know, it's not it's a bit sinister, you know, because you wouldn't have a healthy adult with that kind of skin. You know, it'd be like a newborn baby born with jaundice, or somebody who's maybe like a really heavy alcoholic and their liver's failing and their skin's, you know, going yellow. But yeah, it was very odd, and it's kind of like a pudgy sort of face as well. I'd say it's more like a corpse's face really than a person, so yeah, that's quite freaky. One I want to get onto as well, and I'm going to show you this with the camera, is in that bathroom there. I used to have a couple of weird occurrences when I was a kid, and I'll try and show you some of the things so you understand it a bit better. Okay, so in this bathroom there's this porcelain windmill. It's been there for years and years. It doesn't normally obviously sit next to the sink, I just put it there so you can see it easily. And it has this sort of you know, thing that doesn't puts my teeth on edge. It has, you know, this. It in theory can spin, but it doesn't really spin very well because of how it's constructed and made of porcelain. But there's quite a few times I go in here as a child, and that would just be spinning. And, you know, you'd get freaked out, you'd think maybe it's the air. Could be the air in here because there's like a ventilation fan in the window. But, you know, that would be spinning on its own. But then, what makes this weirder is I said to some friends that, you know, this bathroom was haunted, and they were like, yeah, right, you know, you're full of crap. So we went in here, and, you know, I don't know what we expected to see, but we stood in here about 20 minutes waiting for something to happen. And we were looking at the mirror, so there you go, there's the mirror of me holding the camcorder. And like this shadowy figure appeared very briefly in the mirror, and where it appeared, it's impossible to actually happen because obviously if something appeared, I saw it in the mirror, sort of there, you know, looking out at us, like it was in front of us, so you could see the front of it, you know, in front of us, if that makes sense. However, if I was to put my arm here, obviously it would block the camera. It only appeared in the mirror. And that's the really freaky thing, was obviously, it wasn't like something that materialised in front of me, staring like at me this way. It was something that materialised in the mirror only, in front of me, but it wasn't physically in front of me. So we all ran out the room scared. Nothing like that has ever happened since. I've not had any weird encounters in this room since, but it's quite similar to some of the other shadow people stories people have shared, so I thought I'd share that one. Now, I have a story involving the Men in Black, and if you don't know what the Men in Black are, they aren't like the Will Smith movie, it's a bit more sinister than that. I'd advise you to look them up, because otherwise I'm going to spend far too long in this video talking about the Men in Black. Nick Redfern's books are really good, and funnily enough I contacted him about this story. Here's one of his books. But bear in mind, I hadn't read the books before when I had this encounter, which makes me think it's, you know, a lot more legitimate. It's not like I was bored. I'd read some paranormal sort of encounters and then looked out a window and saw it. So I was on holiday in 2011, and this was in Weymouth. And if you know what Weymouth's like, at the far end of Weymouth there's Chesil Beach, and you go along Chesil Beach and there's an island called Portland. And we were staying in a really nice house that overlooked, you know, like where Chesil Beach is, and you could see Portland in the distance. So it was one of those places at night. It was really nice because you could hear the waves and the like wind ringing the bells on, like, you know, some of the yachts and ships people had docked up. So you'd get this constant kind of just jangly noise, gulls, you know, waves, all that sort of thing. So very nice ambience. But one day, it was during the middle of the day, because I was staying in a room there where the, you know, window looked out. It was at a really good angle. It looked out onto the beach, and there's a road that goes down one side of the beach, kind of like a land bridge. And where the sign was, there was this man stood behind the sign kind of comically like that, so half of him was sticking out, and he was wearing a black suit, even though it was, you know, near a 30-degree day. It was a very hot summer day. He was wearing, like, you know, full-on black suit, white shirt, black tie, you know, that kind of thing. I can't remember if he had a hat on or not. But I think he did have sunglasses, which was the only sensible bit about his appearance. He was just stood there, like, you know, motionless like that, where, if you imagine the signs there, you could just see him comically stood out like he was in disguise, staring down the road like that. I thought, that's really weird. And I was like looking, because before that I kept thinking I was being watched. You know, when you get that feeling, you look out the window, nobody's looking up. You see one or two people walking down the path, and that was it. And so then when I spotted this guy, you know, staring intently, thinking, what's he up to? He was stood completely motionless, just like that, behind a sign. You know, I was saying it was comically hidden. If anybody was actually coming down the road, you'd see him straight away. You know, if you were trying to spy on somebody, what you'd be doing is you'd be dressed in shorts and a t-shirt, and you'd maybe have a newspaper out and being sat on a seat, or you'd be like playing on your phone on the seat or something. You wouldn't be stood like that behind a sign. So, cut a long story short, you know, I thought, that's really weird, what's he up to? We had some binoculars in just the other room, so I went out to get the binoculars and came back. I would have been less than 30 seconds, I believe. Got back to the window, looked, he was gone. You know, couldn't see him with the binoculars, couldn't see him with my eye, he was just totally gone. And where that kind of land bridge is, because the traffic's constantly flowing, a car wouldn't be able to stop, you know, and just pick somebody up from there. So they'd have to walk to either end, you know, to go there, and you wouldn't, even if you were sprinting, be able to do that, you know, in like the 30 seconds that I got the binoculars. So he just, you know, dematerialised, completely vanished. very weird. And then, you know, I read all the Men in Black stuff, like Nick Redfern's compiled a few books on it, and it's all about, you know, these kind of weird, are they aliens or whatever, you know, things that come and threaten people and then they just disappear, you know, and everybody always feels uneasy, like they're being watched and stuff like that. So it's very odd. You know, he said my encounter was a bit like, you know, all the other ones people report. So it's just really weird. You know, no explanation to it. But, you know, just seems to fit in with all the other stuff. I'm trying to think if there was any more. Of course, I'm sure once I've done this video I've thought of some very minor things that happened to me that were a bit creepy. But, you know, I've had things as well where you hear noises and there's nothing that should be making the noise. Nothing really more concrete than that, but, you know, on its own it's still a bit freaky where you're in a house and you hear like what sounds like breathing or somebody walking on some floorboards. Obviously in some houses that can just simply be because they're attached houses, the sound insulation's really poor, so somebody doing something in the next house over you'll hear. Other times, you know, I don't know, it's a bit like it sounds like it's coming right from the house where you're in. That's happened a couple of times in my house, but it's mostly happened in other people's houses where, you know, you hear some noises, there's no explanation on what's making them. And like I said, you can take all these stories for what you will. You could say it's house settling, you could just say I'm crazy because I've had so many different encounters, but, you know, I'll swear all of those I've said today are completely true. I definitely vividly remember them happening to me. Oh, one more before I forget, because I actually took some photos in preparation for this. I'll put them in the video now. There's a lane where I go walking quite a lot, you know, just to get exercise in. It's quite nice to walk. It goes down to the canal, and you can go from the canal to a couple of other neighbouring places. So it's a bit nicer than walking down sort of side of dual carriageway. And there's been lots of times I've been down there where very slightly weird things happen. If it happened once or twice, you just put it down to your imagination, or you wouldn't think much of it. But, you know, I've been down there so many times and there's so many little weird things happen, like, you know, hearing people walking, you know, near you and then nobody's there, all that sort of things. Hearing, you know, odd, again, noises, not seeing anything. I've never really felt freaked out, but there was one occasion, I was walking back and it was during the night because I'd been out clubbing, and then, you know, so I was sozzled, so you know, can take this for what you will. It might have been because I was totally drunk, but it's on this one stretch where lots of weird stuff had happened, and this was before I walked down there regularly, so I didn't know about, you know, weird crap happening. But when you get into the last bit, you've got a few hundred yards where it's just totally straight. The path bends ever so slightly, but, you know, you can see from one end to the other, and if somebody's walking, even at the far end, you can see their silhouette because it's a straight path, and, you know, people's silhouettes stand out. So I had a torch. It wasn't totally, you know, pitch black. There were a couple of stars and the moon visible slightly, but it wasn't, you know, like a bright full moon. So I could mostly see with my torch or my phone light, whichever I was using. And then at the end of the path, there was where you get into the actual residential street. So you got some street lamps there. So you always have a glow coming from the far end. So I had a bit of light in front of me, and there was a little bit of ambient light as well. And then when I was walking down there, I could see this black, you know, like silhouette standing very close to where the street edge is, so the street lamps were lighting up, so, you know, stood there like that. I was a bit freaked out, but there's not really anywhere you could go, and, you know, it was like gone 3 AM, so I wanted to get home. So I'm like walking closer and closer, the silhouettes, you know, the same distance. It's not somebody moving, you're like walking towards you or moving further away. It's just a black silhouette stood there like that. And the only thing I thought it could have been is if somebody had gone out for a cigarette or something, because there's some back gardens that face onto this lane as well, where people can probably, you know, come out their gates to have a fag or whatever else. When I say have a fag, because I'm British, it means have a cigarette, just so you know. Anyway, so, you know, he was smoking, so I thought maybe it's just somebody smoking, so I was, you know, walking from, don't really like approaching this person, but I need to get home, and, you know, I'm within 100 yards now of my house or so, as I'm getting further and further down the lane, getting closer, the silhouette's still there, so, you know it has to be a person's silhouette, and I'm getting closer and it just vanishes, and then you can see the road perfectly behind it, so that's another one of those creepy shadow people stories. As I said, walking down this lane as well, I have had weird things happen, like, where one of the things that can occasionally happen that I have no explanation for, and you probably do think I was completely nuts from all these stories you've heard by this point, is you're walking to near the end of the lane and you can see out into the street, and then normally, obviously I was saying, you'd see street lamps if it was day or night, you'd see some cars parked, whatever, One time I was walking down there and I could just literally see the sky. You know, like if you went and looked up at the sky, it'd be like that. If you've ever played games and you're like, what a skybox texture is, it's a bit like that. It was, you know, like one of those, you know, the Matrix's glitch kind of things, where you're walking down there and then all of a sudden you see something that can't physically exist as it is. It's like all the houses have disappeared and you're just looking into the horizon kind of thing. And obviously as I approach closer, all of a sudden everything just pops in and appears. So, what is that? I don't know. As I said, it could be me being slightly nuts, could be optical illusions. You know, as I said, with the shadowy figure, that couldn't have been an optical illusion because of how close, although as I said, I had been drinking quite heavily, probably 20 plus units of alcohol that night. So you could just discount that one as me being drunk, but it's funny how it's always in the same place where slightly weird stuff happens. But yeah, there's a load more stories for you in the lead up to Halloween. This video's probably gone on for ages, but I hope you enjoyed them.